So Diksha, can we start today?
Yes, sir, we can start. 60 participants have joined.
Yeah. So good morning, everybody. Today Dharmendra is on leave for personal reasons. Today I'll be facilitating this session, and we thank everybody for their involvement and especially the way the exercise have been conducted and the kind of feedback we have received from the last time. I would like to bring some points. The process that we have followed during the last session, we have participants, senior consultants, 5 people, uh, part of ROSS. We have 6 thematic leaders, 2 senior resource persons, 5 DPMs. We have 3 agricultural officers, and we have large contingent from research team, 24. And then we have 10 members from training team, and around 9 members from HN and team, and others around 29. So we look at the process that we have followed and also learned and emerged with feedback coming from all of you. Pre-work for the group has been shared via email and WhatsApp to the participants about this. And pre-work session is organized the next day where participants watch the video module. You know, so and also facilitation of the pre-work session is senior scientists and TLs. And the assignments are designed by the organizing team same day and sent to all of you through email and WhatsApp groups. And we have divided all the participants into 6 subgroups. Each group containing around 13 participants. This group has been created taking into consideration that they have diverse members, from different thematics. We also conducted a support session basically to clear doubts of participants and compile questions that would be sent to Walter during the question and answer session. So today we have identified some 3 questions, which were already sent to Walter before this session started. And then most importantly, today at around 11:45, we'll have break sessions. Breakout rooms are created. The link has been given in the same WhatsApp group where we will go discuss and come back. And if you look at it, some of the topics below were further discussed, comprehend more about plant has limited resources and how humans can degrade them. Understand underlying causes of dangerous hydrological climate extremes. Learn more about the role of natural farming in securing water, food, and other biosystem needs like social stability. While these sessions are going on, documentation experts would be transcribing and generating resource content for their outputs. The questions which are emailed to Walter includes how soon in terms of time can the soil fertility be restored to enable higher nutrient densities in crops and yields that can match that of conventional farming? Is soil biology the major factor that improves the nutrient density in the crops, or do genetic makeup of the seed take an active role? How can the concept of planetary boundaries be applied regenerative agriculture on a smaller scale? So this is broadly the structure, and we also have most important inputs that we have to keep our questions crisp while asking Walter, especially in the open session, and then unmute your mic unless you must speak. And we also want to be active and engaged during the breakout session, which is very important in generating the debate. So we also want feedback before we get Walter's team online. If you can give feedback on what happened so far, basically to enhance this entire process and learning, house is open.
Welcome, Walter, sir.
Are there any feedback from participants?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome, John.
This is Walter, right?
Hello, Walter. Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I can't see anything at the moment. And yeah, but look, Beja, yes, let me know when you're ready. Yep.
Walter, we'll start the Q&A session at in 15 minutes. We are taking participants' feedback for now on how to improve the masterclass. So I think you can also hear.
Any feedback from the participants on the process, on the questions?
We have designed such an elaborate process for you, so I don't think it will be very easy for everyone to get used to it. I would like to hear your comments so we can tweak the process as well. This is the first time where everyone is together. We have heard your individual responses through your facilitators and the support group. So if you want to say something we can do to enhance the process, add a few steps or maybe decrease a few steps, that would be very helpful before the Q&A starts.
Hi, Diksha. Yeah, so Praveen here. So it is very fruitful and useful session one content. And only thing that came to my mind while going through the course material multiple times is that it will be very useful to have introduction sort of context setting for each sub concept within the concept. Like in the module one, there are 5 videos sequentially given. But for me to create the connections, if there is any context, maybe 5, 6 lines, that will be very helpful. Otherwise, for the first time when I'm watching it, some of them look not much interconnected, but I have to create the connection on my own. So that is from my end. Otherwise, course content is very useful and getting to learn the basic concepts as well as the macro concepts. Thank you.
Thanks, Praveen, for your feedback. One more feedback that all of you had provided was you need more scientific citation, maybe scientific papers and reports as in addition to the module material. So we have made a note of it and send the request to Regenerate Earth as well. So maybe from the next module, we'll hopefully get more scientific citations. And is there any way in which the participation in the subgroup can increase? Because I have seen that some groups participate well, while the others are not participating to the extent that we hope to. Any ideas are welcome.
Hi, can I respond to that? One thing that we can consider is to do an introduction for each video, followed by a little discussion explaining the key concepts in regional language. Most of these videos are highly accented, and we are not familiar with that accent. That is one. The second issue is with the concept. So these two are key areas keeping those things in mind, maybe, when you do the summary, that summary can be in regional language so that the connections can be easily made, as Praveen is asking this question. So then you can ask the response. Perhaps that is how you can enhance the participation.
Thank you, Pawan, for that response. I'm expecting the facilitators to give me some response because that is their responsibility to increase the engagement. So coming from someone who's already doing it would be helpful to us.
And also, let's not forget that we are also doing next day. We are doing a pre-work session, where participants are watching these videos in entirety, and then facilitation is happening. It's just not that we are sharing these videos, but I agree some level of facilitation is required in terms of making these connections that help people to contextualize better, and it gives them more connections. I think that we will do it during the feedback session. I think we have this feedback. Any kind of feedback on the kind of videos that are being given? You think they are very long? You think that in terms of discussions and debates, some of what kind of debates have been generated, things like that. Zakir, yes.
Yeah, Rishi. I feel it is better to pause the video and also explain in the local language is also useful, because the videos are also, while playing, they are making a lot of noise in the background. And also that I don't think that should not be repeated, because the voice is making people difficult to understand what's going on, and all those things. So I think that should be avoided. So yeah. And also the communication part, because in advance, maybe 1 or 2 days before, sharing the links, everything, and then asking the people what to do also from the organizer side is also very useful. So it's all becoming last minute communication.
Thanks, Jakir. I think it is the first exercise, and entire team is putting their efforts, and definitely.
So, no. I'm telling, to enhance the effective participation, these are all important things.
Yes,
that we need to follow.
We'll take it on board, Zakir. Thanks for your feedback.
Vishi, hi, this is Anu.
Yeah.
I just had a suggestion. So in case, because it's all kind of circling around the videos, I was thinking that maybe if I were given access to the videos a day before, I can do the transcripts and send it over so that they can be distributed as Word documents as well. And, at least to a certain extent, they would be of some help.
Sure, Anu. I will have a discussion on that. Sure. Thanks. Any questions on the process are welcome, any suggestions. The idea is to strengthen and enhance participation, create more inquisitiveness and queries on, more content. So that would be useful in learning. Diksha, you can also share any feedback offline that you got from others. We have like Rajgopal, giving some feedback yesterday.
We had gotten a few feedbacks. So one point which was very much discussed is the assignment. So the assignments deadline is mostly Friday, and people are not getting enough time to complete the assignments. But the thought process was that if you're done reading module till Friday, Saturday you will be well prepared to ask questions, because Saturday is the day that we are collecting questions from the facilitator. And now that you have done with your material, you'll ask pertinent questions. Now you're done with the discussion in your group, you'll ask relevant questions. So that is the main idea for that. The whole masterclass is based on the aspect of asking right questions, relevant questions after going through the module yourself. So that was a feedback that we got, and we resolved it during the support session. And apart from that, another feedback that we got is in the assignment questions, it's very open-ended answer. So is there any right answer for it? So I would like to answer that by saying there are no right answers, because the subgroup that we have created are so diverse, and people participating in the masterclass are so diverse that we want to know what you're saying. So basically, in India, we are used to this school structure where we memorize things and we write it. We don't want to follow that. We want to know what you think about the module and how you apply this module. The end goal of this module is take the teachings to the grassroots. So I would like to know, how would you apply? And many of you have answered few questions by saying that we need more time for this, or I don't know the answer. I would urge you to write something that you think about the module instead of trying to fixate on the right answer. That is the main reason. I think we can start the Q&A session. I would request Walter to say a few words, and then we can start asking him questions.
Okay. Welcome, Walter. Today, Dharmender was on leave, so myself and Diksha would be facilitating. Just a minute kind of inputs I'll give on the process. I think you understood. We have composition, people from senior consultants, and we have thematic leads. We have senior resource person who are part of this discussion, and large contingent of 24 people from research are part of it. As far as process is concerned, we have a pre-work for the group has been shared via email and WhatsApp to the participants. And then same day we are sending material to all of them. And assignments are designed by the organizing team the same day, And then we have 6 subgroups, and each subgroup has around 13 participants, and we're ensuring that diversity, especially they're coming from different teams. We are also organizing subgroup support sessions, so that they can clear the doubts of participants. So broadly, this is the process, and welcome you. And I know that you heard some of this feedback just now, and three questions are sent to you, and we are waiting for your inputs. Thank you, Walter.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you switch me on? I mean, I have you got me on video yet? Because I'm not seeing anything. I've just got a black screen. Can you see me?
Shiva, can you take care of it?
Walter?
Yeah, Diksha, Sar has to on his video.
Walter, can you switch on the video? Is it possible?
Okay, let me see. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on.
It's gone, sir. Yeah, no. Now it's
Yes,
back.
you're here. Yeah.
We can see.
Okay, look, very good. Hang on, I'll just sort of arrange myself a little bit better. Right. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much. And I appreciate, I've been listening to the feedback, and it's, yes, very valuable. Obviously, people are coming from lots of different backgrounds into this. As you said, you've had 24 people from research. Well, that's exciting and very, very welcome. But of course, there's also then the practical local farmers. So I think people are coming from many, many different backgrounds and perspectives. What we've been trying to do is just ask a lot of questions. And as you rightly said, there's not one single answer. I think the really critical thing is to have discussions, to open up and ask the questions, well, how do we use this information? Where is it taking us? How do we practically, use it to go forward? And basically, not all of it will be relevant to everybody, and it may not be appropriate in all cases, but that's really a key part of the discussion, right? It's really a key part of, right, where do we want to go? Where does India need to go? What are the sort of learnings from natural farming that we'll be talking about? and then in a sense, how do we make use of them? It's also understandably a little bit confusing at the beginning because we're just setting the actual big picture strategic parameters at the moment, and we'll be going into a lot of details as we go through the 10 modules, of practically how we can rehydrate land, how soil biofertilities can be enhanced. We'll be going through each of those issues in subsequent modules. And so obviously there's a lot of questions that people have got now where they haven't actually seen the information relevant to that question yet. So it suggests that we don't get too worried if there's unanswered questions. I think it's just basically documenting those questions, making those very, very clear in your mind. And then as we go through the 10 modules, where relevant, obviously bring those up. And at the end of the whole period, of course, if there's anything outstanding or left, then we can actually sort of document that and say, right, okay, we need more information on particular areas. Last time we had a Q&A, and I think there was a very important question on, for example, resilience. What governs resilience, and what's the actual practical means of achieving resilience? And see, that's something that actually a very good question, and in a sense it's something that we say, look, we may want to look at that topic in a lot more detail, because if a lot of people are asking that, we really want to say, look, okay, let's have a special focus on that in a subsequent program. Okay, so basically that's as means of introduction. As I understand, we're now talking about is actually the first content module. Okay, the second module, the first was introduction, and this one we were looking why we need natural farming, right? Why we need natural farming in both the Indian and global context, and really the bigger imperative global context that we're trying to address through natural farming. Also, of course, then in the discussion going, well, what's natural farming got to offer? How could it be of benefit vis-a-vis where we've been, in a sense, the green revolution, the industrial farming that globally we've been embracing since the Second World War, and of course India has been a leading proponent of. So how do we go beyond the green revolution with natural farming to address some of these global imperatives and contexts? And basically the short video that we sent really was outlining, yes, why, what are the challenges for India and globally in the next 10 years in terms of, what's happening to the Earth's finite resources, what's happening to our degradation of them, where are climate change, hydrological extremes impacting, and what are they going to do to actually the food security, water security systems we all depend on. And really, how do we actually put this agenda onto actually the international, international priorities? How do we get that front and center to the UN? Because it's critical for meeting each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and humanity's future. There's also a big question, of course, as far as populations. There's going to be 9 billion of us by 2030. And of course, they all need water, they all need food, they all need social stability, they all need economic systems to function in. And so what role can natural farming play in helping to secure that? Okay, so that was really part of the big, the question of why, and just discussing those challenges facing the world. We then sort of went down a little bit more specifically, talking about India, and really how does this particularly affect India, particularly from a water security point of view, because obviously that's perhaps the most key limiting factor, but then also, of course, growing food. And also, how do we actually buffer climate extremes, hydrological climate extremes, and what role does natural farming play in each of them? Where has been India's experience through natural farming in doing that? So that whole physical building resilience, like what has been India's experience, what's been the natural farming experience in meeting those water, food, buffering, resilience, physical essentials, imperatives. We've also then raised in the issue the question about the economies, right? I mean, basically, we're all people, we all live in societies, in economies, and how do you actually secure the viability of our local economies, our jobs, employment, because that's really critical for social stability. And of course, India in a unique position is in a sense very advantageous because you still are fairly decentralized in village economies. Over half of Indians still live in sort of basic regional villages. So it's really quite a powerful tool. How do we ensure the economic viability of village economies through the use of natural farming? How does natural farming at a village level help secure water, food, biosystems, obviously social stability, social equity, even microfinance? And I think then the last part of that discussion in this module 1Y, was in a sense saying, right, why natural farming vis-a-vis the conventional system? Because if we're wanting to say, look, we've got to embrace natural farming, it really becomes important to say, how does this benefit, or what are the advantages relative to the experience we had from the business as usual status quo? And that's really looking at the Green Revolution, what drove the Green Revolution, certainly the imperative to meet food security in the 1960s, 70s, but also what have been some of the consequences of the Green Revolution in terms of water degradation, land degradation, dependencies, and really, is it sustainable? And basically then, as it has problems and it is creating problems, we're really asking the question, how do we go beyond the Green Revolution, and what role can natural farming play in that? It then becomes quite interesting, because if we're looking then at natural farming, and particularly the innovations that of course have been demonstrated in Andhra Pradesh, does it give us an opportunity to turn what currently is a lot of red country, bare, dry, fallow country for much of the year? Does it give us an opportunity to turn that green? So Vijay's concept of 365 days green, how effective has it been in that? How effective has that been in helping to secure the viability of farmers, local food supplies? But then another area, which is, again, I think really worth talking about in a big way, the experience, the innovation of pre-monsoon dry seeding, and how effective has that been in helping us enable us to rehydrate and regenerate what was previously arid wastelands. So I think these are two key elements of natural farming which go way beyond the Green Revolution, actually quite revolutionize opportunities to go beyond. And I think we're looking at now the potential of natural farming into the future to address these imperatives we raised earlier, and sort of start exploring, yes, how does natural farming, pre-monsoon dry seeding, give India strategic tools to go forward, both in meeting water, food, and economic futures. So look, that was the overall scope, and really it's enough time for, I shouldn't be talking so much. It's now a question of, yes, what are your feedback, and what are your questions, and what are your thoughts on that information that was presented? And can we actually have that interactive Q&A that we can explore that further? And then, of course, once we've done that, then of course we'll go on to module 2, or the third masterclass, where we'll be looking actually at what we need to actually change to extend natural farming. But that's comes later. At the moment, we've got this Q&A on why natural farming is important in vis-a-vis the global context, why it's particularly relevant to India, and why it's particularly relevant vis-a-vis business as usual, the green revolution farming. So yeah, basically, if that helps, I'm very keen to have discussion and Q&A on that.
Thank you, Walter, for the introduction. And I would encourage, so we had a support class with few of the participants, and we compiled 3 questions. So I would ask you one of those questions, and later I would ask someone from the participant to ask it. So should I start?
Yeah, then that's very good. It's very helps moderating those questions through you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So the first question is, how soon in terms of time can the soil fertility be restored to enable higher nutrient density in the crops, and yields should be proportionate to that of conventional farming?
Right. Okay. Look, thank you very much. And this actually, I raised that. This is something that we'll be talking, we'll be addressing in the technical terms, how to, I think, in module 6, on biofertilities. But it's, of course, a critical question right from the beginning. And I'm sure some of the researchers will be asking that right from the beginning. Now, the answer is, how soon can soils be regenerated to enhance their biofertility? Yes, as you're showing with natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, within 2 to 3 years, you are clearly seeing a significant increase in productivity, therefore in soil water holding capacity, in nutrient availability, biofertility, and yields in those crops, right? And so that's been demonstrated by all those natural farming small operators in Andhra Pradesh in a very, very consistent level. They're getting, from VJ's data, they're getting at least equivalent yields, but they're doing that with a fraction of the input costs. And so their return on investment is much, much improved, but also they're doing it much higher reliability and resilience. And that's actually a very important point, because as climate extremes intensify, and they will, then it's the actual resilience of that production system and its capacity to buffer and accommodate these extremes rather than be vulnerable to them. And I think we're going to see a lot more, as we are in Australia too, where conventional crops, highly dependent on good conditions, high input conditions, whether it's irrigation, water, fertilizer, pesticide management, these are very vulnerable to then climate extremes, whether it's drought, frost, storms, etc. Whereas the natural farming plants are much, much more resilient. In Australia, we're now getting a situation where farmers used to be getting four reliable crops out of 5, so 80% of the time. But now with climate extremes, it's often dropping to 2 out of 5, 40, 50% of the time. So that resilience issue is very important. So basically, we're seeing, soils can be regenerated within 2 to 3 years. It's definitely valid that often in the first year, with reduced inputs, yes, soils are having to rebuild their natural biological processes, and therefore there is often a drop-off in the first year in productivity till these natural processes restart. But then progressively from years 2 and 3, you're seeing that improvement. Obviously, this varies from soil to soil, depending on what the treatments are using, but also how much soils have been degraded through past practices. And obviously where there's been severe degradation, it can take longer, right? And there's no question about that. It can take a bit longer, especially if the soil's been highly degraded, compacted, lost most of their carbon, water holding capacity, and in a sense, the nutrient availability. So basically, the answer to the question is yes, 2 to 3 years is how fast, but then things progressively improve beyond that. And perhaps over the next 5 years, you'll see progressive improvements, both in terms of yield, but as I just mentioned, particularly in the reliability, the resilience of that crop production. Does that answer the question, or would you like some more discussion of it?
From my end, it does answer the question. If anyone else wants to add something to it or ask something else, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, good morning, Walter. This is Zaki.
Yes, yeah.
So, regarding your answer to the question of fertility and productivity enhancement, in case of 365 days green cover, we have seen immediate first year itself, we could be able to get the yields on par with chemical forms. So even in most degraded lands. So how it is possible that that's happening on the ground?
Okay, well, look, okay, so this, we'll talk about that in more detail in the petagenesis discussion, but see, it's very simple, because as we are rebuilding soil structure, soil health, then the water holding capacity of that soil improves rapidly. You know, its capacity to infiltrate, retain, and make available water increases enormously, but also the surface area exposure of natural soil minerals. So the biofertility, the actually availability of nutrients in that soil can increase again dramatically without having to add nutrients. It's really making the existing mineral nutrients more available. And then with time, you get increased cycling of those nutrients. So both the hydrology, the water availability, and the nutritional availability increases with natural farming. And that's, in a sense, what makes it possible for these crops to grow. Should also add the biggest issue that we're observing, and of course nature uses, is the longevity of green growth. You know, this concept of 365 days extended time for growth. If you look at a conventional system, yes, basically it'll grow very actively, very rapidly when everything is optimum, when water is there, nutrients are there, and everything is optimum, either naturally or through artificial inputs. But the minute things become limiting or stressed, the growth stops. So basically, you need continual input or continual availability, whereas in the natural farming system, you've got, because of the soil buffering effect, this longevity of growth. Often you see, like if you think of a rainfall event on a conventional system, you have a rainfall event and you might get growth for 5 to 10 days and then it slows down again. But if you've got that soil structure well developed, it's able to hold water, then that same soil from the same rainfall event may be able to continue growth for not just 5 days, but 50 days. And that's a 10-fold increase in longevity of green growth. 10-fold, 1,000%. And of course, that's where the dividends come in. That's where the productivity comes in, because now you're able to just extend growth. And you've got a 10-fold growth dividend potential. That's unheard of in input agriculture. You know, there's nothing we know that we can do as far as putting inputs into agriculture that gives you a tenfold, 1000% growth response. But nature's doing that through longevity. We can as well through, again, natural farming by building the sponge, the resilience of those soils.
Thank you, Walter. One more thing I always think is that in the more conventional industrial agriculture, they will just grow monocrop, and most of the period they leave the land fallow after plowing, and then whatever the carbon that has came into the soil, it will in the fallow periods it will react with carbon dioxide and go as oxygen and go into the atmosphere. So there is no stable carbon in the industrial agriculture. But if it is if you increase the growth for 365 days, I don't think that will be minimized. Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, look, Zakia, very important. And of course, this follows by increasing the longevity of green growth. By definition, we're reducing the fallow period, or the period that soil is there without living green plants. And the living green plants is what drives, in a sense, the carbon input into that soil, both through root growth and particularly the root exudates. And that keeps that whole soil function living for longer. And definitely you're right, because when you don't have roots, living roots, you don't have those exudates, the soil's basically shut down and hibernate and go back to more or less a dead mineral state. And then obviously that takes a lot of, it's just basically locked up, not available. And it takes a long time for plants, when it does get conditions do come better, for restarting. And so by having this longevity of green growth, you're keeping that soil actively hydrated, nutrients available, and so you're able to extend, growth in contrast to just having it shut down. And as you had in Andhra Pradesh, you see that you have a crop, and the crop might last 15 weeks or so. But then the rest of the time, the soil is just sitting there bare, dry, heating, desiccating, and effectively dead. And that business of keeping that soil continually green, continually live and active is really a powerful multiplier effect. And you're finding that actually quite interesting, Vijay sort of indicated, because now you're getting some plants that are actually becoming more perennial under that 365 days strategy, whereas before you had to plant them every season. Because you've got 365 days growing conditions, and you're not actually having to destroy the root systems of those plants, they can refunction, they can reshoot. And so you've got plants like cotton and what have you that can actually become perennial and actually not have to invest all that extra carbon into regrowing root systems. And they can, of course, invest that in more shoot growth, which again goes directly into productivity. So, very positive feedback loops by keeping that soil hydrated with nutrient availability through these microbial processes and allowing plants to grow 365 days of the year.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now, sir,
Vijay, sir, you can comment, kindly comment.
Yeah. Hi, Walter.
Yes.
Couple of questions, but just address those which you think is relevant for this module. Others may be, done in other sessions. There is a lot of confusion, among many people, including our own CRPs and our own staff members. The role of crop residue mulch versus living root. So my own understanding, based on what I heard from you, from Christine Jones, is the living root is the most important thing, and the crop residue mulch, is has a different property, not so much for humus formation. So that is one question. The other question which, I've been asked even at very high levels is the confusion between organic fertilizers, organic, manures versus the inoculum or the biostimulants that we are using. So, how exactly they are triggering the microbes in the soil? The seed coating, the biostimulant put along with the seed. Because what Mr. Nayak has done in Anantapur is he is insisting that not only the simple seed coating, but even the soil amendment is added to the seed. And that is something I remember you recommended when you came here in 2019. Yeah.
Okay,
Over to you, Walter.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you, Vijay. And look, two detailed questions here. The first one, of course, about crop residues, right? Now, obviously, yes, they contribute to the carbon in the soil, but not the majority of the carbon. As you rightly say, most of the carbon in the soil, that's building soil carbon, is coming from the roots, but particularly from the root exudates liberated. A plant will normally put, just say 30-40% of the carbon above ground in the shoot growth and put 30% in the roots. And again, roughly another 30% in exudates to feed the soil microbial ecology. I mean, they vary plus or minus. And in a sense, nature has already designed it in such a way that, yes, 60% plus of the sugars produced from photosynthesis are invested in the soil. But the litter or the sort of crop residue are also very, very important because they're very important in providing soil protective cover from desiccation and erosion and heating, right? And that's really important because if a soil heats up above about 35 degrees centigrade, then you start effectively sterilizing that soil, right? Most of the biological function will switch. And from your red soils in Andhra Pradesh, in summer, they'll go up to 60, 70 degrees centigrade temperature. So you are really sterilizing, cooking those surface soils. So the mulches are very, very important in that. But of course, the mulch, if they're dry, yes, they don't break down rapidly. It's too dry for fungi and bacteria to mostly, break them down, and they just stay there as dry surface mulches. And then they can create some problems because they can create problems in terms of reseeding into them if there's too much stubble, if there's too much mulch. And so people go back to burning those crop residues because there's too much crop residue for them to reseed plants into them, right? And then, of course, by burning it, they're, again, counterproductive because you're adding a lot of carbon dioxide, carbon particulates, air pollution to the air, but you also making that soil bare and exposed and heated yet again, right? So you're losing the protective effect of the mulch. And that's been a very widespread traditional practice, burning stubbles, burning this residue. And of course, it's created enormous air pollution problems, particularly in northern India. And so the objective is to say, yes, we've got these crop residues, but how do we incorporate them more rapidly into soil? And of course, nature's done that by basically having these mobile biodigesters, mobile compost heaps, which we call herbivores, or in India, basically your cows, wonderful animals. And of course, they're able to digest all that crop residue and turn it back into biofertilizer, basically dung and urine, but also, of course, milk and protein and, really valuable. So these crop residues are extremely valuable because they become the food for herbivores, right? And not just cows, insects and a whole lot of other herbivores. So basically, it's a case of, I mean, yes, they can become a problem if they accumulate, if there's not enough breakdown and cycling of them. But nature avoided that by both herbivores and then, of course, 365 days active growing soil microbes breaking them down. Again, the problem is if we leave them on the surface, they can become, obviously, prevent the reseeding of plant, but they can also become, of course, fuels for wildfires. And for example, in Australia and most of the world's savannas, that's extremely serious because it's those wildfires that are basically oxidizing vast quantities of carbon, adding it to the air, climate change, but also aridifying those landscapes. If we have crop residues accumulating too much and they can't get broken down, they can also become problematic in the sense they can be phytotoxic. You know, that they can just build up and become essentially, phytotoxic. Leachates from them become too severe. And we know that, for example, in your eucalypts that you've grown in India, where you've brought eucalypts in, but you haven't got necessarily all the fungi that naturally break them down. You're accumulating very acid litters, residues, and of course the phenolic leachates from those can be pretty destructive on the soil. You know, so there's that sort of problem from phytotoxic leachates. And that same thing happens in agriculture, right? The other thing that, of course, these residues can do for nature to try them, break them down, they need to have a certain carbon-nitrogen ratio. The organisms need, obviously, nitrogen to be able to try and break them down. And the organisms, the microbes, the fungi, and particularly the fungi, are much, much more active at taking nutrients from soil than plants are. And so, in a sense, most of the essential nitrogen that you want to grow your crops with is then used by the fungi to try and break down the litter. And so you end up with, in a sense, a nitrogen starvation in that soil because all that nitrogen is being used by the microbes to try and break down the litter. So they can become counterproductive in terms of the nitrogen nutrition of the plant. So look, these are the processes, and really what the ideal though is yes, I mean, obviously we're going to have residues. If they're grown naturally, they have a very much higher nutritional integrity in the residue. And as in India and Andhra Pradesh, you're finding that the herbivores, the cattle, love eating them. This is really nutritious food. And so basically there's no problem with residue because the cows are just eating them, turning them back into milk and biofertilizer, which is then enriching your soils, right? So it's really just redesigning natural nutrient cycling processes, litter breakdown processes, and in a sense that then quite effective. But definitely in the green revolution system, and where we don't have herbivores in the land, you can end up with 4 or 5 tons of crop residues per hectare per annum, which won't break down because the soils are basically being killed for most of their microbes, and you've just got this litter. And so the farmers basically have to burn it, or that's their own thing. And of course, that's where your air pollution problems, New Delhi, etc., is really, has driven that very badly. Okay, so then it comes to the next question you asked.
No, Walter, just 1 second. I think this is a great clarification because in our case, crop residue mulch and live living root, we are using it together. It's not one or the other. So I think your explanation is excellent. I mean, it will help us to clarify that to our field staff also. And after your discussing with you, the PMDS fodder is being given, I mean, is being used by the animals. So that's
Yeah.
another excellent economic return to them.
Yeah, and actually just adding one more point, of course, by building the soil structure, the soil carbon, it's holding more water, it's staying moist for longer, so therefore it can actually do more litter breakdown because there's still enough moisture to do that. Okay, and then we should add actually on another front, and this is what you so elegantly demonstrated with pre-monsoon dry seeding, that litter, when it's being broken down, is actually also generating metabolic water. So, growing plants in arid areas, naturally, these seedlings to germinate can source water from the breakdown, the microbial breakdown of this litter. And that's water that would never otherwise be available because this is happening pre-monsoon. There's otherwise no water in that soil, but the microbes are in fact generating enough water to allow those pre-monsoon dry seeding crops to get started. So again, they're really the lifeboat for pre-monsoon dry seeding, that initial hydrological step. Now, the next question you asked was then about, organic manure and biostimulants and what have you. And again, it's very simplest if you go back to exactly what we talked about. There was then litter on the ground, and then you had animals. Animals were eating them. And of course, then they were excreting them basically as biofertilizer. And so here is a lot of organic manures. But by going through an animal gut, it's very high nitrogen content because the gut microflora. And so you're ending up with a very high nutrient, source from that animal excreta. And that mixed with the carbon gives you very healthy organic fertilizer composting activities, right? So in a sense, that's what organic manures are about. They're really carbon from the biomass of plants, the residual biomass of plants, and then so much nitrogen from animal manures. It doesn't have to be cows, it can be insects, it can be birds or whatever, but basically creating a carbon nitrogen ratio of some 20-1, so you allow optimum biological activity. Okay, and so that's in a sense the basis of what actually organic manures are about. Carbon plus nitrogen from excreta, giving you a carbon nitrogen ratio of 20-1, which then keeps that fertility of the soil going. But the whole thing is driven, of course, by microbes, and basically sometimes you have situations where the microbial activity is very low, and classically green revolution crops where we're using biocides, which are effectively killing most of the soil microbes. So you've got very low microbial activity, very low nutrient availability, very low nutrient cycling. And that's, of course, why you're so dependent then on ever more nutrient additions, because these natural processes aren't working. To get the natural processes going, we need to stimulate those soil microbes, okay? And that's in a sense where your biostimulants and your seed coatings and your organic amendments, your dung amendments come in. They're acting as not just as nutrients, but their main value is as stimulating the activity of these organisms to drive all these processes, drive the availability of nutrients, their solubilization, fixation, access, uptake, and cycling. 80% plus of the fertility of soils is related to the health of those microbial processes, not how much nutrient you put on. Whereas the Green Revolution more or less killed all those processes and made itself completely dependent on more additions, ever more on additions, right? And that, of course, then becomes toxic, both economically, because you then have to subsidize fertilizers at a vast, social national expense, but also it's toxic because then you destabilize the balances of nutrients in soil. You're adding so much nitrate, for example, artificially, that's acidifying and oxidizing soils and destabilizing. It's becoming effectively toxic. Often becomes, it's acidifying. It often creates acid conditions. And again, as it creates more acid conditions, aluminium comes into solution, cadmium comes into solution, lead comes into solution. And so you get heavy metal contamination of soil, again, not by adding cadmium, lead, but basically these nutrients becoming available because of the acid conditions. So basically, natural manures avoid all that. They're basically operating through stimulating the organisms in the soil to accelerate the fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling of nutrients. And that's what drives fertility in nature, and that's what drives fertility in natural farming systems. That's why you're getting ever better yields without having to put nutrients on, because those 5 processes make the available nutrients in that mineral soil much, much, much more available, right?
Yeah.
And it's more or less a rainforest. In a rainforest, it's so productive, not because in nature we're putting nutrients onto it. It's so productive because of these cycling processes. So the world's most productive systems exist often on very poor soils, but because of the efficiency of their microbial process. And that's what we're really using in natural farming.
Right. Thank you, Walter.
No, pleasure.
Diksha, go ahead.
Another question was about nitrogen cycle. Devuttam, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Thank you, Diksha. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're
please.
audible.
Okay. Good morning, Walter.
Good morning.
We have a group discussion about the module 1, and we have come up with a very important question that it says that about molecules of nitrogen. Some
Yes.
of the molecules may get unfixed. So in that case, fixing of nitrogen, it's a natural and slow process. So we are curious to understand, is that enough for the crops to produce good yield? And if it is not so enough, then how can we promote biological nitrogen fixation more promptly?
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And again, excellent question. Very, very important question. And we'll talk about it now, but we'll talk about it much, much more when we look at that module of biofertility, enhancing biofertility. I think it's module 6, but basically we'll go into more detail, but let's talk about it now, right? Nitrogen, of course, is critical for plant growth. It's critical for us. It's basically a key component of all the proteins. So yes, life needs nitrogen. And nitrogen basically exists in the air, right? 78% of the air is nitrogen. It's an extremely important, but also extremely dangerous compound. And so it's basically, nature's put it in the air in a triple bonded, di sort of molecular structure, 2 nitrogen atoms with triple bonds. So it's extremely stable, but it's really a critical, powerful resource on this planet, the nitrogen in the air. But plants need a continual input of, 30 kilograms per hectare per annum of nitrogen to optimize growth. So all growth, microbial growth, plant growth needs continual input of nitrogen. So nature's again evolved very, very sophisticated mechanisms which take the nitrogen from the air, expend quite a lot of energy and some very sophisticated enzyme biochemistries to convert that nitrogen from its stable form as 2 nitrogen molecules with a triple bond, and make that nitrogen available in forms such as ammonia, amino acids, and nitrates. Okay, so it's actually that fixation of nitrogen from the air into forms that are now available for life, for plants and microbes. You know, the ammonia, the amino acids, and of course, nitrates. And it's really, therefore, as we were just saying to Vijay in that last explanation, it's the actual fixation of nitrogen to make it available that is one of the key natural rate limiting factors on plant productivity. And of course, nature makes that available through, you know, and you're all aware, I mean, most of us are aware through, for example, symbiotic associations. These are back, I mean, okay, first of all, I should say, the only thing that can make nitrogen
Detailed
available,
message ఇప్పుడు నువ్వు చెప్పినవి in the name
the
of
only thing,
Ride గారు EVC గారు
yeah, the only thing that can make nitrogen available, in fact, bacteria, you know, like basically some of these ancient life forms, blue-green algae bacteria, right? So, but these very ancient life forms, because it was a part of the original biochemistry of life on the planet. And it's the bacteria, when they form symbiotic association with plants in, for example, legumes and root nodules, that in these nodules, yes, these bacteria using energy from the plant, sugars from the plant, can be effective at fixing nitrogen to now allow those legume plants to grow. And of course, then leaching that nitrogen out into the soil in ammonia forms for other plants to grow as well. So that's not just legumes. There's similar situations exactly. I mean, similar symbiotic associations exist, for example, in casuarina, which is a tree. You have them in India. We have them in Australia, where an actinomycete called Frankie is, again, able to symbiotically fix nitrogen from the air and, again, produce prodigious quantities, 30, 40 kilograms per hectare per annum, nitrogen to keep that legume, I mean, that casuarina and its ecosystems functioning. On top of these symbiotic nitrogen fixing processes, there's also a lot of processes in the soil which do the same thing. And these are organisms, again, ancient bacteria that live in the rhizosphere of the roots that are basically fed by root exudates. And they're, again, asymbiotically or just by themselves, turning nitrogen as a gas back into ammonia amino acid forms. And these are things like Azotobacter, Azospirillum, and the blue-green algae. And of course, they're again contributing to the nitrogen conversion. The other basically critical area is there's nitrogen in, there's bacteria covering the surfaces of foliage, leaves, etc. And they're also often algae, and they're again able to fix nitrogen from the air. And so they're actually directly fixing nitrogen and allowing the foliage of some of these plants to absorb it. So in a sense, there's another bacterial fixation and supply of nitrogen in the actual leaf ecology, the phyllosphere. Then on top of that, there's a lot of organisms, higher organisms, insects and animals that again have these nitrogen fixing organisms in their gut. And for example, termites, right? They just live on basically wood, lignin, but they've got, again, blue-green algae in their guts, and they're able to sort of then basically use that lignin to make lots of nitrogen and, of course, increase that nitrogen supply for their life, but also, of course, their habitats. And, of course, as we've said with Vijay before, so do animals, you know, the rumen of animals, again, and the guts of animals, they're basically taking raw materials, often high lignin, high cellulose materials, and they're, again, fixing and adding nitrogen so that the excreta from the animals is much higher in nitrogen. So insects and animals, again, are contributing. So we've got these natural sources of nitrogen, and that, in a sense, was then limiting the productivity or driving the productivity, but also limiting the growth of plants. And so that was, in a sense, the basis of nature. And of course, we then were very, very much looking at these nitrogen sources, managing these nitrogen sources, whether it's legumes or other, animal dung nutrients, because that was such a critical part to biofertility up to the last century. But then basically 120 years ago, we learned how to actually do that nitrogen fixation process ourselves through the Haber-Bosch process. And we basically were able to then take natural gas or nitrogen of the air with natural gas using lots of energy, and we were able to make nitrates ourselves from the air using these high energy inputs. And so now we're producing lots of nitrate fertilizer. In fact, we're adding about 170% more nitrogen to the planet compared to the natural fixation of nitrogen by these microbial processes. So we're running 270% of nature's rate of nitrogen fixation because of this Haber-Bosch nitrogen fixing process. And that's given us a lot of nitrogen-based fertilizers to use. And of course, we've been adding those nitrogen-based fertilizers to our industrial agriculture, and certainly we've been getting an increased productivity as a consequence of them. But in adding these nitrate fertilizers to the soil, we actually are doing a lot of damage, because excessive nitrogen fertilizer is actually oxidizing carbon from the soil through microbial activity, but it's also acidifying the soils. And we talked a bit about that, Vijay, in the last question. And so basically this excessive nitrogen fertilizer input has resulted in actually soil degradation very seriously. It's also often leaching again into waterways. And of course, it's resulting in a lot of eutrophication or pollution of waterways. And in a sense, we've got a lot of problems with actually the death of marine habitats because of excess nitrogen. So in a sense, we've disturbed that nitrogen cycle and the nitrogen input through this artificial nitrate production process. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with nitrate, but it's just keeping everything in balance, that a crop needs an optimum amount of nitrogen continually through its growth, different rates at different times. But by adding fertilizer often at 10 times the rate that that plant is needing, we're doing a lot of destructive damage to the to that soil. And so basically that's how nitrogen gets fixed, both in terms of nature and of course now because of our industrial process. And in a sense, that's the responsibility we now need to take. We've got to say, look, we've got to manage this nitrogen. We've got the power to produce nitrogen, but we need to have the wisdom also to use it in a balanced, wise way rather than degrading it. And that's, in a sense, the key issue for the Green Revolution and going beyond the Green Revolution, because you in India particularly have had the experience now of high nutrient inputs, nitrate inputs, etc., into soils, but you're losing soil physical structure because of it. You're losing then the microbial ecology of those soils because of it. You're polluting rivers and what have you because of it. Not just India, all over the world. And we're now actually crippling the productivity of our biosystem. And we're going to need those healthy soils, those biosystems to feed the 9 billion people by 2030. So we've got to think now wisely beyond the Green Revolution to say, how do we actually back off these dangerous additions and get back to a balanced supply of nitrogen that actually can optimize nutrient production, help regenerate our soils, and avoid the pollution of our waterways and our air. Does that help you a little bit with answering the question? I'm sorry it's often a bit long, but there's a lot of processes involved.
No, it's
thank
absolutely all right. Thank you for enlightening us, Dr. Walter. Thank you.
Sir, can
Yeah.
I ask a question here?
Diksha,
I'll
next
just make a mention.
yeah,
We'll get.
Uh,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
We'll talk a bit about this in module 6, definitely.
I would request Satish to ask the next question. That will be the last question of the Q&A session. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Diksha. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Right. Dr. Walter, thanks for your input. So this is regarding uh, the bioavailability of nutrients in the plant produce, for example, food grains, fruits, and vegetables. So we discussed earlier that the bioavailability of nutrients in the plant produce also keeps going now. So I was wondering, and this is the case even with higher synthetic agrochemical usage. For example, a state like Punjab in India pumps in more fertilizers and pesticides, and still the nutrient value of a crop goes down. So, so just linking this to microorganisms. So then, do microorganisms play a role and help plants to assimilate nutrients and store them in vegetables or cereals? So it would be nice to know your view on this.
Okay, look, again, thank you, and very intelligent, important, critically important question. Again, quite complex. We'll go into more detail on this later because this is really the fundamental issue as far as the preventative health consequences for humanity going forward into the next decades. Okay, as you know, we basically got an explosion, particularly in the Western world, of self-induced diet-related diseases, the cancer, the diabetes. I mean, everybody's affected by it. It's growing exponentially, and it's going to really be one of the key crippling limitations of humanity. So if we don't kill ourselves with climate change, we're certainly killing ourselves with our diet-induced diseases. And that's because our food, the food that, especially in the industrial West now, the food that we're eating is basically totally compromised in terms of its nutritional integrity. That's both the concentration of nutrients, but more importantly, the balance of essential nutrients in that food. All life needs basically some 40, 50 essential nutrients in the right forms, concentrations, ratios, and balances. We've got some macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, that we need in large quantities, but we need some, 40 other essential nutrients, often in trace elements, parts per billion. But these are critically important for enzymes. And of course, those enzymes are critically important for key biochemical processes, such as disease resistance, right? So often parts per billion of other nutrients like selenium, but without selenium, we don't have these certain enzymes. Without those certain enzymes, we can't regulate health. And so, as you rightly say, we've, in the last 70 years, green revolution, but the whole industrial agriculture, we've been growing more and more crops, but the nutritional integrity, the nutritional content of our food has been going down to the extent it's now causing these disease calamities. And why that is again, partly we alluded to it in the last answer, is because as we're adding more and more of these nutrients and excessive concentrations to the soil, in doing so, we're killing the microbial processes that have naturally regulated the uptake and availability of nutrients. As I mentioned to Vijay's question, it's the actual fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling of nutrients, which governs, nutrient availability and, of course, the health of plants and the health of people effectively, those 5 microbial processes. But if we kill those microbial processes through excessive, toxic additions, either biofertilizers, chemical fertilizers, or particularly biocides, the fungicides, insecticides, weedicides that we're adding in prodigious quantities to our soil. We kill those processes. We lose the capacity for plants to discriminate in what they take up in those correct concentration, forms, and balances. Okay, so this is a bit not difficult, but it'll take a little while to explain. In nature, you see, basically plants, yes, they have roots, but they also have these mycorrhizal associations, these extensions of the root systems, vast lengths of fungal hyphae that grow from the roots and colonize the whole soil. And it's these mycorrhizal hyphae that are in fact on 98% of plants, and they govern over 90% of the nutritional uptake of plants. So really the nutrition in nature was taken up by these membrane or these mycorrhizal hyphae, which are membrane tubes, and the nutrients are taken up selectively, intelligently from soil surfaces. So they're concentrating essential nutrients that the fungi and the plant needs and leaving behind toxic nutrients. So they are actually creating a, selective, intelligent nutrient uptake from the dead, often toxic mineral soil and making, in a sense, life available. And so it's a quality control interface that exists between the soil and living healthy plants. And of course, what we've done, we've killed all that microbial interface, that microbial interface with our toxic addition of nutrients and, as I said, biocides. And so now we're growing effectively our food plants hydroponically. We're just growing them in effectively soil solution water. The soils just become mineral substrates to hold the plants up, but basically the nutrients are only available from the soil solution. And the plant is now, our hydroponic plants, our industrial plants are just taking up nutrients as they're transpiring water, and they're just taking it up effectively as straws from that soil water. But that soil water, of course, contains all the soluble nutrients, and all the soluble nutrients we've added as fertilizer, the nitrogen, nitrates, the potassium, the phosphates, the sulfates, but often none of the essential trace elements, because these are absorbed onto soil surfaces and don't actually become solubilized without microbes in that soil solution. So we're actually super saturating our food with NPK, sulfur, often in acid soils with aluminium, with sodium and other undesirable elements, but we're basically not getting any of the essential 40 other micronutrients, trace elements that we need for our biochemistry and preventative health. And see, that's really explains why we're growing more, but the food quality is getting less and less because we've actually killed nature's quality control system and nature's strategic, intelligent uptake process between the dead soil, toxic soil, and our plants. And of course, that's really what's driving this diet-induced disease pandemics in our communities. So very, very serious health issue. And of course, if we're going to survive as a species, we're going to have to get back into nutritional integrity. The quality of the food we're eating is critically important. And of course, the only way we can do that is growing plants naturally. So we're using these natural fungal interfaces between the soil and the plant to help provide the nutrition. And in a sense, it's all doable. We can achieve it. We can make the change rapidly. We can get extremely effective health outcomes as a consequence. But that's the reality and the realization why natural farming is so critical. It's not just we're using less imports, but we are restoring these natural quality control, selective uptake processes in the nutrition of our food. Now, again, I hope that's as an introduction, giving you a explanation, but we will go into this in more detail in one of the following later modules.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walter. That was very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Walter. Lakshmi Durga ma'am, do you want to add something to the question? Because I think nutrient density was part of your question as well.
Yeah.
Good morning, Dr. Walter. And you have really given a lot of details about the scientific details about how to improve the soil and which helps to improve the nutrient content. I just wanted to know from the maternal child health point of view, like, is there any specific practice which helps to improve the nutritional density of the crop? Because generally when we given a counseling to the family, the pregnant mother, we say that take a nutritious diet, but especially during the third trimester, if you miss the nutrient, it will give an impact on the perinatal and neonatal outcomes. So similarly, is there anything that we need to give to the community on which practice will help add more to the nutrient density?
Right. Look, very important question, particularly as we're going into health effects and for pregnant mothers, right? Look, it's not nutrient density. It's we've got to be very careful here, because having more nutrients, if there's excessive nutrients, they become toxic, right? So we've got to be very careful. The danger is if we fortify food with excessive nutrients, we have super magnesium concentrations in our food, it's going to cause problems, serious health problems. And so the issue isn't nutrient density, the issue is nutrient balance, nutrient integrity, getting the right balance that we evolved with of all the different nutrients. And we can only get that through these selective, intelligent uptake processes through these natural farming systems. Okay, and so it's not a matter of adding more nutrient to making the food more nutrient dense. It's all about going back to these natural selective nutrient uptake processes so we get the right balance of nutrients. Because of the balance, that natural balance, which is what guarantees health, governs health, not the density. And we can get back to that balance very, very, very simply through natural farming practices, by not killing these microbial interfaces between the soil and the plant, and by relying on them to give us our nutrition. So if we know how our food is grown, if we know that it was grown in these natural processes, as they has throughout our evolution of fungi, animals, plants, then we can be confident that, yes, we are getting the right nutrients we need. We have exactly the same process, selective intelligent process, as a secondary quality control system in our gut. So we can eat food, and again, our gut microbiome and our membrane absorption in our gut will absolutely repeat the same process again as it exists in soils as a secondary quality control system. So we can be assured of the safety, but only if we have food which has that nutrient integrity, that nutrient balance in the first place.
Thank you, Dr. Walter.
No, pleasure.
Thank you, Walter, for your insights.
Can I just ask a question, Vishy? Please, Walter?
So, yeah, this is the last question. I think we crossed the time, please.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, look, let's put that question on notice, send it to me. And then, because with a lot of these, we are raising issues, very important issues, but we'll be going back into more detail. And then we can take this question on notice and incorporate that in the subsequent modules.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. My question is very simple, Walter.
Yes.
How does one understand impact of externalities in the context of natural farming and in the context of conventional farming?
Very good. Yes, it's a very important, again, excellent question, but it's a little bit more, it's so important that it needs a bit more detailed discussion. So can we please take that on notice, right? And then we have to sort of basically let's look at that externality, because it's going to be critical for how do we catalyze the change in society, in policy, to make this natural farming extended globally.
Thank you, Walter, for your inputs. We'll continue this. Walter has another meeting, I was told. Thanks for this extended time, Walter. Look forward to more fruitful discussions.
Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to next week and
much.
continuing the very powerful and wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So all of us will get into break groups. There is a link provided in WhatsApp link, so we'll all move into the groups.
Yeah, 1 minute, Vishi.
Diksha. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Diksha, you please call me after this breakaway sessions over when you are free during lunch. Can you do that, Diksha?
Sir, I just joined the call. I was logged out for some time. Can you repeat that?
Okay. Please call me during lunchtime when you are through with these sessions. I have some important conversation with you. Thank you,
Yes,
Diksha.
sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
We can put up the link for the breakout session.
Yeah, Diksha. I request all the facilitators to confirm your respective group mates.
Can the facilitator confirm whether all their group mates are in the call right now? So we'll accordingly divide you into breakout rooms so you can discuss about the topics that have been stated in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, I'm just checking.
I think we will put up the link then if no one's answering. Yeah, Nivedita, go on.
No, I was just checking if all the group members are there. So it seems like most of them are.
Diksha, I was logging out. I have to start that link now.
Okay, so should I put up the link in the WhatsApp group so people can join through that, or should I put it up in this group, in this Zoom call?
Either ways.
I'll put it in the WhatsApp group. Yeah. So when you click the link, you will be logged out of this call, and then you will enter your breakout room with respect to your group.
Hello. I think in the common group, Diksha is discussing about what is to be discussed by each room person. But I'm not able to go back. Can anyone guide how we can go to that discussion and join this group back again? Hello.